We start with breaking news and a remarkable new look at the case special counsel Jack Smith plans to bring against Donald Trump in the federal election interference case. That's thanks to a new filing from DOJ that was submitted just a couple hours ago. Prosecutors say they intend to introduce a sweeping trove of evidence in the case, dating from years before the 2020 election, all in order to illustrate Donald Trump's criminal intent. From this brand new filing, quote, the government will offer evidence reflecting the defendant's historical record of making such claims. For example, as early as November 2012, the defendant issued a public tweet making baseless claims that voting machines had switched votes from then candidate Romney to then candidate Obama. During the 2016 presidential campaign, the defendant claimed repeatedly with no basis that there was widespread voter fraud. The defendant's false claims about the 2012 and 2016 elections are admissible because they demonstrate the defendant's common plan of falsely blaming fraud for election results he does not like, as well as his motive, intent, and plan to obstruct the certification of the 2020 election results and illegitimately retain power. DOJ also plans to introduce statements made by Trump in 2016 and 2020 that hinted at what the ex-president would ultimately wind up doing. That is, refusing to accept the will of the voters and the results of a free and fair election in which he lost. Prosecutors say this, quote, the defendant's consistent refusal to commit to a peaceful transition of power, dating back to the 2016 presidential campaign, is admissible evidence of his plan to undermine the integrity of the presidential transition process when faced with the possibility of an election result that he would not like. Also in this new filing, a stunning, fresh allegation involving an unindicted co-conspirator in an early chapter of Trump's dangerous and desperate efforts at overturning the election result. Quote, on November 4th, 2020, the campaign employee exchanged a series of text messages with an attorney supporting the campaign's Election Day operations at the TCF Center in Detroit. That's where votes were being counted. In the messages, the campaign employee encouraged rioting and other methods of obstruction when he learned that the vote count was trending in favor of the defendant's opponent. Prosecutors point out that right around that time, protesters appeared at the TCF Center. You can see them right here, trying to get in just outside the vote tally room where those votes are being counted. And just as the case that Jack Smith is bringing involves years and years of remarks that Trump made well before he even became a political candidate, it also involves statements he's made after the Capitol insurrection. Once again, from this new filing, quote, the government plans to introduce evidence at trial showing that in the years since the January 6th attack on the Capitol, the defendant has openly and proudly supported individuals who criminally participated in obstructing the congressional certification that day, including by suggesting that he will pardon them if reelected, even as he has conceded that he had the ability to influence their actions during the attack. A sweeping and broad case against disgraced ex-President Donald Trump, built in large part by his own statements, is where we begin today with some of our most favorite experts and friends. Former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Heaphy, is here. Plus, national investigative reporter for the Washington Post, Kara Lennig, is here. With me at the table for the hour, former U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill. Kara Lennig, I start with you. So much of what I think remained open questions, even during and to the end of the congressional committee's work, was how will they prove intent? How will they show what he actually wanted to do? It seems that Jack Smith has taken on that challenge and then some, and saying, how about this for intent? It is what he always does. It is what he always did. It is what he will always do.
Absolutely, Nicole. And by the way, welcome back. What a good day you chose to return. Congratulations, but I'm glad you're here today on this topic. Very newsy day. This filing is full of revelations about Jack Smith's plan. His plan essentially to tell the story, a broad narrative of how Donald Trump rejected any election in which he was not the winner, going back all the way now to something like 2014, again in 2016, and again in the months before 2020, when he stoked essentially fears and conspiracy theories that absentee ballots, which he knew were starting to favor Democrats early on, stoking the fears that those were rigged, somehow vulnerable to all sorts of malfeasance and interference, all of which was completely phony. I found two of the elements of Jack Smith's filing today the most striking. One was the Detroit Center allegation and episode that you referenced, starting here today in your rollout, in which basically a campaign employee, upon learning that there is a trending direction in which Biden is winning in the Detroit vote count, suggests rioting on November 4th. And then the second that I found the most, new and fresh was the element in which Donald Trump seeks to ruin the reputation and undermine the reliance upon a chief counsel to the Republican National Committee, who begins in November warning people that Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis's claims of fraud in the election are a joke. And he warns that those will likely mislead millions of Americans, and that this is a very serious and dangerous kind of plot.
You know, Tim, there is so much in this filing. It's the sort of thing I'd spend 2 hours on if I had all two. I don't have all two today because Liz Cheney will be here in the next hour, but maybe we'll ask her about it. But this feels like part of proving his intent is proving his knowledge of the effect that his words had on his supporters. And I want to show you, we went and found my colleague Heidi Presbella's reporting from right outside, and exactly what was being called on transpired. Watch this.
An increasing mob-like scene of self-proclaimed poll watchers who say that they want to get access to the building. So many of them have rushed into the building here that I'm actually talking to official Democratic poll watchers from the Democratic Party who've been shut outside of the balloting room, which they're supposed to have access to. Eamon, it's gotten to the point where we do have a police presence here that is blocking access to the building, because not only have they swarmed the room, but they are now over in terms of COVID restrictions.
So just as your witness, Stephen Ayers, testified that he would have left if he'd seen a tweet from Trump telling him to do so earlier, just as the insurrectionists who in their sentencings were saying, look, we were only there because Trump told us to be there, just as the wife of one of the Oath Keepers said Stuart Rhodes' ex-wife was waiting for Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, there was a dialogue, a call and response, a tweet and act, and a reflection back to Trump of exactly what effect his words had.
Right, Nicole, exactly. Let me start by also welcoming you. It's nice to see you in that chair. Well, welcome back, albeit briefly. Absolutely. Look, he knew all along that his words were not taken rhetorically, but were taken literally. There is example after example after example, well before the election, that his words are taken seriously. And that informs the intent behind his words, right? When he goes to the ellipse and says, you have to fight like hell, he has to know, based on that prior experience, that people in the crowd, particularly people that he was informed were armed, would take that literally. Jack Smith has to prove that he intended to impede, interfere with, or obstruct an official proceeding. His words matter. The intent behind his words matter. That's why he's reaching back and articulating in this pleading that he will demonstrate a pattern of the president's incendiary words having a very practical effect that informs the meaning of his words, and it directly bears upon intent. Prosecutors have to get permission to introduce evidence of other bad acts that bear upon intent, common scheme, or motive, right? This is a federal rule of evidence 404B, which requires an advance evidentiary proffer to admit the evidence of those other bad acts. That's what Jack Smith is doing. He's laying out all of this information bears upon the president's intent. It demonstrates a common scheme. That's why it's relevant, and that's why he's asking the judge in advance to rule, even though it's sort of outside of the period of the charged conspiracy, it's directly relevant.
So, Claire, here is some of what that evidence would be. If, as I just wrote down, 404B, if I can find a way to use that in a sentence in the next 2 years, you can buy me a donut. Here's some of what that evidence would look like should it end up being presented to the jury in the trial. This is him refusing to commit to accepting an election in 2020 and 16.
Win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville. There's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I want to ask you here on the stage tonight, do you make the same commitment that you will absolutely, sir, that you will absolutely accept the result of this election?
I will look at it at the time.
So I will look at it. We all have covered Trump long enough that they'll study our brains when we're dead, but we also know that that is his way of saying no in the moment.
Absolutely. And this is not, I mean, this pattern is not going to be hard to prove. He started talking about fraud in the election in the spring of 2020.
Right.
And he kept talking about it. This is a marketing effort. This has nothing to do with the facts. This has nothing to do with the law. Those things are as far away as another solar system. This only has to do with his desire to feed information to his supporters that he knows they will swallow whole and undermine the results of the election. And I don't think this is going to be hard to prove. And by the way, the cross-examination of him, if he were to take the stand, would be tricky. Because do you think he will ever admit that his words don't have power over his supporters? He can't admit that. He's proudly said he could shoot someone on whatever avenue it was, and his supporters would still be there for him. So he would never say under oath that he doesn't believe he has power over his supporters, because that's entirely his self-worth.
Right.
So his lawyers who are saying this, they're pleading, well, he can't control what his supporters did. That's not him saying that, and I don't think he'd ever say that on the stand.
That's a great point.